Mayhem, unanswered questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, and the Boston Marathon bombing. This just became available. You can still buy books online. And this is the author is Michele McPhee. She's a friend of the show. She's a friend of mine, and she's a tremendous investigative reporter. Good morning, Michele. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you so much. So you're out in California right now.
Yeah, I am. I'm living in L.A., doing some writing for television.
And what's it like out there right now with this pandemic in L.A.?
You know, it's. I think it's just tragic and sad everywhere when you hear about these people who are, brought to the hospital dead on arrival. You and I both are great friends with law enforcement and first responders, and it seems like the people I'm talking to in Boston, the Boston police lost an officer yesterday. My friends in the FDNY are talking about their entire jobs are picking up DOAs. It's the same here in LA. I think Governor Newsom took some action a little bit earlier, so we're not seeing it as widespread, but it's also not as densely populated. Like, for the first time in my life, I live in a little house that doesn't have a shared wall. So it's a different lifestyle here than it is in big cities like New York or, in downtown Boston. It's just weird. It's very eerie. I have to get out of the house a little bit every day. I think you've known me long enough to know I'm very active, and sitting around is not for me. So I go on these walks, and it's really bizarre to see LA downtown. I live close to downtown LA, and it's just empty. And to see no traffic on the freeways is unheard of. You can get from my house to Beverly Hills in 20 minutes, which is like trying to, get from down the North End to Marshfield in 20 minutes.
It's incredible. It really is. And you're still obviously very deeply in contact with people back here. It's incredible. I mean, you can get to Boston in under an hour from New Bedford right now because there's nobody on the roads. But it really is. But with everyone home, they have time to read, and your timing couldn't have been better, although I know you didn't plan it, because we missed your book party.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to seeing you in Boston this week, and my friends in New York last night, and, the publisher is fantastic. My new editor, Chip Fleischer, is just amazing, and Steerforth had, great plans for this week to roll out a book tour, which it would have been awesome to see you with everybody else, but, that's going to come, just like the marathon itself, it'll be postponed, and any questions that people have, or if you want to get a signed book, I'll definitely be back in Boston.
No, we're looking forward to it. So I was telling my listeners, I've had the book now. You sent it to me about 2 weeks ago, and I ripped through the thing in one night, and that's not because it's an easy read, but just because it's so fascinating, so well written. The story is incredible. Why don't we give people an overview if they've never heard of what happened at the Boston Marathon bombing?
Well, so we all know that exactly 7 years ago today, 2 bombs were detonated seconds apart near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. The first bomb was detonated by Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the older of 2 brothers, and that bomb killed Crystal Marie Campbell and, maimed dozens of others. And then a few seconds later, his little brother Jahar detonated a second bomb behind a row of children, and that bomb killed Lindsay Lou and Martin Richard, that little 8-year-old boy that Marty Walsh famously said had a smile that could light up Fenway Park. And, this was a horrifying event. And, I was on my way to the Boylston Street Firehouse. I got a text from an NYPD cop saying, "Are you all right?" Then I heard the commotion. And, in a lot of ways, and I was on the ground for 9/11. I was there when, that awful carnage and watching people make that terrible decision to jump from the buildings. But that was really the only bloodletting that you saw. Boylston Street was different. It looked like Baghdad. It was horrifying.
It really was. And then the hunt is on for the bombers. And what Michele lays out here is that there are people who knew a lot more and about this. Not that it was going to happen. I don't mean on the government side, but there appears to have been a relationship between members of our government and the Tsarnaevs. Why don't you give people a thumbnail sketch, keeping in mind that they do have to buy the book, Michele?
Well, so just in a thumbnail, on the night of April 18th, there was a lot of unusual activity. We all know that, the brothers were on the run. Everybody's looking for them. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right after the press conference where they released the photos of suspect white hat, suspect black hat, you had residents of Cambridge calling 911 and calling the Cambridge police because there was suspicious vehicles lurking in and around the area of where the Tsarnaev lives in MIT, in that Central Square, Cambridge area. So the Cambridge police would roll up on these vehicles and say, hey, we have something going on, let me see some ID. And several times it would be FBI vehicles who would essentially tell the Cambridge PD to buzz off and cuddle for terms. At one point, you actually had a Cambridge cruiser chasing an unmarked FBI vehicle. It was Mayhem. And one of the sergeants from the Cambridge police radioed, these mother bleepers are here and someone's going to get hurt. And sure enough, that night, Sean Collier was assassinated. And that's when questions really started to arise about what the FBI knew and when. I mean, Chris, we know that the Russian FSB sent first the FBI and then the CIA 2 separate letters in 2011 saying that they had intercepted messages between Cambridge, Tamerlan Tsarnaev in Cambridge and some of his relatives in the Northern Caucasus of Russia. And they were concerned that Tamerlan was going to travel to Russia, join the jihad, and bring that kind of, mayhem back to the United States. And what that did, now remember, September 2011, there was another pretty horrific event that is now tied to Tamerlan unequivocally. The bodies, I was working at WCVB for the investigative unit at the time, and I did a big investigative piece, what happened on Harding Avenue. Well, at the time, I had no idea what happened on Harding Avenue, other than on the 10-year anniversary of September 11th, there were 3 young MMA fighters found dead in what a cop described to me at the time as a scene out of an Al-Qaeda training video. Their throats were slashed. 2 of the Jewish victims were sexually mutilated. There was money sprinkled over the bodies. It absolutely looks like an act of jihad on the 10-year anniversary of the, most horrific terror attack this country has ever seen. And as it happens, we now know that Tamerlan Tsarnaev committed that homicide with another Chechen named Ibrahim Todashev. Ibrahim Todashev was shot dead by the FBI in May of 2013, a few weeks after the Boston Marathon. But as he was shot, he was writing out a confession. Me and Tam tied the guys up. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So that same month, the FBI was visiting Tamerlan Tsarnaev at his house in Cambridge to do field interviews after the Russians warned us about him. We're expected to believe, Chris, that I'm a reporter. If I interviewed you today, and in a year and a half you blow up something, I'm going to remember your face. Are we expected to believe that the counterterrorism unit of the Boston field office FBI didn't remember interviewing the Tsarnaev family in 2011 when they blew up the marathon in 2013? Let's just start with that fact. Does that ring true to you?
No, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
And then what doesn't make sense is that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was very close friends with one of the victims in Waltham, a guy named Brendan Mess. They used to live together. And Brendan Mess's friends now tell me, you remember I broke that story for ABC News about Tamerlan being linked to that homicide. Right. We now know that the friends told, CPAC in Middlesex County, the homicide detectives, that, hey, Tamerlan never showed up at the memorial. They were close friends. We're wondering about him. Tamerlan was close friends with the woman. They went to the same mosque that Brendan was dating, the woman who found the bodies. Tamerlan just happened to be an under-the-table driver, according to many residents of Waltham, of Jerry's Italian Kitchen, which was the last phone call placed by the 3 guys, ordering some, sausages and chicken parm, and yet he was somehow never considered a suspect. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So now you have this brutal triple murder. You have a guy that's on 2 terror watch lists. The Russians tell us we think he's going to come to Russia. The U.S. puts him on 2 watch lists. But guess what happens in January of 2012? Tamerlan Tsarnaev goes to Russia. He gets out of the country, but more alarmingly, after spending 6 months there, wiretapping his relatives and meeting up with known jihadi, there's a raid, a counterterrorism raid, in a small village in the Northern Caucasus called Udamesh. Everyone in this training compound, it's called In the Forest, is the parlance for terrorist training camps. And everyone in this training camp ends up dead. One of the Russian counterterrorism agents is dead in this long, hours-long firefight. The only guy who gets out of the region alive is Tamerlan Tsarnaev, and the next day is on a one-way flight back to Boston. And, okay, that raises some eyebrows. Who paid for his ticket? On his death certificate, it says never worked. So raises some, how did the guy go out of the country for that long? Why is he wiretapping his relatives? It raises some questions. Then, how did he get back through customs without a passport, on his green card only, even though he stayed past the 6 months? How did he get back into the country and then weeks later he's on the fast track to citizenship? Again, doesn't that raise some questions, Chris?
No, it's absolutely mind-boggling. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, the author of the new book, just came out, Mayhem, the Unanswered Questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, and the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, people here locally, of course, may have forgotten that just how much this case involves Dartmouth and New Bedford folks, and people all through the book. You have the names of these people who were living in New Bedford who had some involvement with the Tsarnaev. Some of them went to jail. Talk about the professor, though, out at UMass Dartmouth.
Yeah, that guy's he was supposed to be a witness, and then all of a sudden he disappeared off the list. But when Tsarnaev was in high school, he started corresponding with a guy named Brian Glynn Williams. Brian Glynn Williams is an admitted CIA agent. He's not in the clandestine services because it's all over his social media that he's a CIA official. He was also a professor at UMass Dartmouth. And what was his claim to fame? Well, he happened to share the very same ideals as a well-known, high-ranking CIA official named Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller and Brian Glynn Williams subscribed to the notion that we should arm Muslim extremists against the Russians. It worked really well with Osama bin Laden. Remember those days?
Right.
But that principle stood for a long time within the CIA that if we help these Muslim extremists, we can keep Russia at bay. And that was their line of thinking. And Brian Glynn Williams was one of the people that subscribed to that idea. And in 2012, during Pamela Tsarnaev's trip to Russia, the Jamestown, which is largely described as an umbrella of the CIA, Jamestown, which at the time was run by Graham Fuller. Now, I'm going to get back to Graham Fuller in a second. Mm-hmm. But Brian Glynn Williams was the keynote speaker at an event in Georgia, Russia, that was attended by Pamela Tsarnaev, and posted photos of himself in Russia and everything. And, Russian intelligence officials pointed to that Pamela was meeting with CIA people, associates, in Georgia, Russia during his trip. Graham Fuller now we all remember that uncle that we kind of applauded at the time. He came out to his front lawn in Maryland, and he's like, my nephews are losers. And we were all like, yes, they are losers. And, well, as it turns out, that uncle, Ruslan Sarny, who for a very long time worked in the oil industry, he was married to that CIA official Graham Fuller's daughter, Samantha Ankara Fuller. So when he was standing in the front lawn of that Maryland house, he was connected to the CIA via Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller, who is connected, obviously, to the professor, Brian Glynn Williams, Graham Fuller was the station chief for the CIA in Ankara, Turkey for a long time. And he definitely was there in 2002 when the entire Tsarnaev family was allowed into the United States via where? Ankara, Turkey.
Ankara, Turkey.
Now, I know this sounds like the stuff of tinfoil hat conspiracy, but Chris, you know that every single solitary fact that I'm telling you in my book is annotated. It's all in writing. There's nothing here that's a theory or maybe it could be true. I didn't put anything in that book, Mayhem, that I cannot prove, and I challenge anyone with a question. They can tweet it at me, at Michele with 1L McPhee. I'm happy to provide every piece of evidence because conspiracy theories are not followed up with evidence. There is hard paper for every single solitary thing that I have uncovered in that book.
Oh, absolutely. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, who's the author of the new book, Mayhem, the Unanswered Questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, the Boston Marathon bombing. It just came out this week. And, of course, people who listen to this show regularly, we have Congressman Keating on almost every week. He's all through this book. Congressman Keating held hearings on this or participated in the hearings.
Remember, the FBI, and this is the part of it that makes me crazy. I cannot believe that people are not more apoplectic about this. But the FBI refused to cooperate with the congressional investigation into the Boston Marathon bombing. Steadfastly refused. Ignored subpoenas, didn't show up. Remember, Bob Mueller quit the FBI when? April 2013. The then head of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, quit when? April 2013. Even the Middlesex DA, who I liked a great deal, Jerry Leone, when did he quit? April 2013. When did the head of the Boston FBI field office announced his retirement, April 2013. And there seems to be a pattern there, no?
Absolutely.
And in the way that New Bedford comes into it, it's funny, Chris, I know you have a lot of sources down there in law enforcement, and they talked about the search for Jahar Tsarnaev in at UMass Dartmouth and with his old buddies there that lived in New Bedford. And it raises another question. So there was a cell phone that was registered to Jahar Tsarnaev that pinged at the Watertown firefight, and then the next day made its way to New Bedford, which is why that became the center point for that search. I think that the question that we could ask is, wait a minute, how did that phone get from Watertown to the scene of a bloody firefight where Dick Donahue almost died, Tamlin Tsarnaev did die, bullets were flying through people's houses? How did that phone make it from Watertown all the way down to New Bedford?
It's a fascinating question. Of course, the kids down here were helping to throw his stuff, help Tsarnaev, the young Tsarnaev, hide all of his, some of the evidence anyway, right? The bags and things like that he had. Some of it.
They went to the dorm room and they took out fireworks and a backpack and tossed it. And a lot of people point to that and say, look, would Sean Collier be alive if those kids had called the FBI? You know, the FBI told ABC News when I was working with Brian Ross' unit that they set up extra phone banks to take. They thought they were going to get flooded with tips about who these suspect, white hat suspect, black hat was. Do you know that they maintain that they didn't get one single solitary call?
Really?
Which I find astonishing. I mean, Jahar and Tamlin went to Cambridge Bridge in Latin. The teachers were all cheerfully testifying on Jahar's behalf, but none of them called the FBI to say, I know who these guys are.
His friends recognized him on television, right? And they started texting each other.
Well, yeah, they started texting each other. Hey, dude, is that you on TV? Yep, LOL.
Right. These kids are in New Bedford at the time, and at UMass Dartmouth. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, investigative reporter.
He was on campus up until Thursday. So he went to the gym at school. They have all kinds of videotape of him wandering around UMass, dealing drugs, doing his normal business, which is what he did at UMass. His whole job at UMass was to deal drugs.
Yeah, he had horrible grades, and yet he was recruited to come to that school, it appears anyway, right? By the professor.
Perhaps Ryan Glenn Williams.
Right.
Who mysteriously just doesn't want to talk about this at all. I've tried to reach out to him many, many times. But you know what I do? I stalk him on Twitter a little bit, Chris, and it's interesting the stuff that he posts. There was a movie about the guys who went to Afghanistan on horses.
Yes.
He was a consultant on that film. And he tweeted, one of the things that made me laugh is that he tweeted at the airlines, like, I'm a very important CIA official who needs to get to my movie premiere. I need to get on my flight.
I
screenshotted it. I'll send it to you.
Oh, that's beautiful. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, who's the author of the book Mayhem, The Unanswered Questions About the Tsarnaev Brothers, the U.S. Government, and the Boston Marathon Bombing. And folks, I have to tell you something. Michele is the only one, really, and to include, I think, even the FBI, who's interested in this case anymore as an investigator. And you have uncovered all kinds of documents and sourced everything. This book it's a great read, but it's also a really well done investigation. Now, you don't believe that the Tsarnaev brothers, and I don't think the FBI believes it either, that the Tsarnaev brothers actually built that bomb.
No, the FBI, I mean, it's in court records. There's absolutely no evidence that these brothers built the bomb. They found with tiny little, dustings of firework powder, but no real bomb factory, which was interesting. Because if you look to the night of April 18th, and there was this very strange robbery that was committed at 7-Eleven that they initially tied to Sean Collier's murder. I have since had people who are close to a guy named Daniel Morley identify that robber at 7-Eleven as Daniel Morley. Now, why does that matter? Because 55 days after the Boston Marathon bombing, police are called to a house in Topsfield, Massachusetts. An elderly woman crawled out her window, so did her companion. They were terrified. They said that Daniel Morley had snapped. He drew on her face with a Sharpie and said, I've done something I have to answer to God for. So the police are called. There's a very long standoff. The bomb squad is there. The Stadies are there, and Topsfield police are there. All of a sudden, out of the blue, they turn around, and the FBI is there. And one of the Stadies remembers saying to another Stadie, who called the feeds, as in the FBI?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Daniel Morley is finally surrenders after they had to cancel the mass at the church the Sunday morning. I mean, it was really crazy and chaotic. So they bundle him into an ambulance, and the parents, the mom gives cops permission to go into his bedroom. And what do they find in there? Nearly every component to the Boston Marathon pressure cooker bombs, green circuit boards, ball bearings. They even found a box top to a 6-quart Fagor pressure cooker, which was the exact size and brand that was used at the Boston Marathon. What was written on the back of that box top? A recipe for thermite, which is a bomb accelerant. And where did Daniel Morley work for a very long time? Well, coincidentally, he worked at the lab that was very close to the spot where Sean Collier died.
At MIT.
Executed at MIT. So he worked at an MIT lab. He had this recipe for thermite. He had all of these components that were very similar to what we all saw in the crime scene photos that were taken from the bombs on Boylston Street and the other pressure cooker bomb that was found on Watertown. There's videos of this guy creating detonators on his computer. Like, there's all of this evidence that points to Daniel Morley being involved, including the fact that he knew Tamla and Tsarnaev. But what happens is the FBI comes in, they take all of the evidence away from Topsfield PD. Daniel Morley is bundled up into the Topsfield Cuckoo Hospital, and Topsfield, Tewksbury. He went into the Tewksbury Mental Institution. I went there a few months into his confinement, and I waited for him, and it was really a very scary place. And he comes ambling down the hallways, a big hulk of a guy, and I said, Daniel, did you build the bomb? And I'll never forget it, Chris. He shrugs, smirks, turns around and went, wasn't me. Now, if someone asked you if you built to this day, Daniel Morley has not denied being part of the Boston Marathon. If somebody accused me of being the bomb builder at the Boston Marathon, I would set the record straight. This guy has never once denied being part of the Boston Marathon bombing. He spent 2 years in the Tewksbury State Hospital and is released shortly after Jahar Tsarnaev was sentenced to death. And you know what this guy does now, even though he was charged? His whole case went away. It's illegal in Massachusetts. We have something called the Bomb Component Bill. Anyone can look it up. You can't have bomb-making materials in your house. It is a crime now. And that's exactly, this guy's bedroom was filled with bomb-making materials. In the indictment, if anyone reads the superseding indictment against Jahar Tsarnaev, there's a line in it where they say, on the night of April 18th, the brothers went to the 410 Norfolk. They got a machete, a knife, the gun, and they, headed off to Watertown and carjacked Dong Meng and all the things that happened. Well, I remember highlighting it like a machete. Where's this machete? There was never a machete found in Watertown or on the boat. What are they talking about, a machete? Well, you know where they did find a machete? At Daniel Morley's house.
Incredible.
So it really raises yet another question about, were other people involved in the Boston Marathon attack? Were other people in Watertown? There was some discrepancy. Jeffrey Puglisi, who's a very well-respected firearms expert and a Watertown police sergeant, he very clearly remembers 2 muzzle flashes, but only 1 gun was ever recovered.
No, the story, Michelle, and we're up against the end of the hour, so we're going to let you go. But Michelle has just scratched the surface for us here. The rest of the story is in her book. You can get it. It's Mayhem, the unanswered questions about the Tsarnaev brothers, the U.S. government, and the Boston Marathon bombing. That's available on Amazon and everywhere else, Michelle?
It's everywhere, yep.
Everywhere. So, Michelle, thank you so much.
And
Be
I'm
safe.
happy to take questions, Chris, from any of your listeners.
Beautiful. And they can reach out to you at Michele with 1L McPhee.com.
Sure, that's perfect.
Michele McPhee.com. All right, Michelle, listen, have a wonderful time. Be safe out there in La La Land.
Thank you so much. You're the bomb. I always love being on your show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.